Well, sometimes you'll be going along in life, caught up in your own thought, perhaps even your own misery, and an unthought of encounter with beauty suddenly redeems the moment. We've all had experiences like this, where a sight or sound or smell or a memory has caught us off guard and has suddenly taken us out of ourselves, out of the present moment and out of the present concern. There's a beautiful poem by William Wordsworth called St. Paul's that is concerned with such an occasion. It's a very short poem. It was never published in his lifetime, so this is one that was published after his death. It was among the poems, one among the many poems, actually, that Wordsworth just simply did not publish. I just want to read you this poem, but before I do, let me tell you a little bit about the occasion. Wordsworth, who was living in the Lake District in 1808, decided to go to London to visit his friend Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And Coleridge wasn't doing well. He hadn't been doing well for most of his life. Wordsworth went to go visit Coleridge. He probably stayed with Coleridge at the Currier House in London. Probably. We don't know where Wordsworth stayed, but he probably stayed there with Coleridge, visited with Coleridge, and even attended 2 of his lectures. Now, Wordsworth received a letter while he was there that his sister-in-law, Sarah Hutchinson, was sick. And so Wordsworth left Sunday morning very early at 7 o'clock to catch the coach back to the Lake District up north in Cumbria. But the trip had not been a good experience. Coleridge, who was mentally unstable, physically unstable, spiritually at a loss, it seemed. He was battling addiction and his own demons that Coleridge had and that followed Coleridge throughout his whole life. So Wordsworth was somewhat sad to find his friend in that condition. As he was walking through London, he has this encounter at St. Paul's. This was on the 3rd of April. Wordsworth makes it back and writes this letter to George Beaumont on the 8th of April. And he tells George in prose what happened. And then I'm going to read you the poem that he created out of this event. He writes to George, "You will deem it strange, but really some imagery of London has since been hither my return, been present to my mind, than that this noble vale. I will tell you how this happened to be. I left Coleridge at 7 o'clock on Sunday morning and walked through the city in a very thoughtful and melancholy state of mind. I had passed through Temple Bar and by St. Dunstan's, noticing nothing and entirely occupied by my own thoughts, when looking up, I saw before me the avenue of Fleet Street, silent, empty, pure white, with a sprinkling of new fallen snow, not a cart or carriage to obstruct the view. No noise, only a few soundless and dusky foot passengers here or there, and beyond and towering above was the huge and majestic form of St. Paul's, solemnized by a thin veil of falling snow. I cannot say how much I was affected by this unthought-of sight in such a place, and what a blessing I felt there is in the habits of exalted imagination. My sorrow was controlled, and my uneasiness of mind, not quieted and relieved together, seemed at once to receive the gift of an anchor of stability." Now that's the event. And here's how Wordsworth rendered it into a poem. Here's the poem here. You'll notice in the second line it's addressed to a friend. That's Coleridge, the friend who appears in the prelude as well. And usually when Wordsworth addresses a friend, you'll see it all throughout his poetry. He's referring to Coleridge, except in Tintern Abbey, of course, in which the poet is referring to his sister. But here the friend is Coleridge. He says, "Pressed with conflicting thoughts of love and fear, I parted from thee, friend, and took my way through the great city, pacing with an eye downcast, ear sleeping, and feet masterless that were sufficient guide unto themselves, and step by step went pensively." Now mark, Not how my trouble was entirely hushed, that might not be, but how by sudden gift of imagination's holy power, my soul in her uneasiness received an anchor of stability. Here's the phrase from the letter when he wrote to George. A gift of imagination's holy power. This idea of a cultivated imagination, one that is sensitive and receptive to the forms of beauty in humanity, in nature, is quickened and acts as, in a way, a redeemer within the soul. My soul in her uneasiness received an anchor of stability. Now, this is an interesting phrase. This is an interesting word, anchor. Of course, metaphor here, but we hear it in Tintern Abbey, where he addresses nature as the anchor of my purest thoughts, the guardian of my heart and soul of all my moral being. But here, by sudden gift of the imagination. Of course, Wordsworth's larger understanding of nature contains the human imagination, because nature isn't just the external world, but also human nature, and also this larger spiritual sense of something that's rolling through all things. And so this boon, this gift, a gift sublime, in which the burden of the mystery, which the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. Here we have this lightening happening, but not in cast in terms of a burden being lifted, but as an anchor of stability of mind and spirit. Okay, sorry, back to the poem. It chanced that while I thus was pacing, I raised up my heavy eyes, and instantly beheld, saw at a glance in that familiar spot a visionary scene, a length of street laid open in its morning quietness, deep, hollow, unobstructed, vacant, smooth, and white with winter's purest white, as fair, as fresh and spotless as he ever sheds on field or mountain. Moving form was none, save here and there a shadowy passenger, slow, shadowy, silent, dusky, and beyond and high above this winding length of street, this moveless and unpeopled avenue, pure, silent, solemn, beautiful, was seen the huge majestic temple of St. Paul in awful sequestration, through a veil, through its own sacred veil of falling snow. So Wordsworthian here, but for one, we have these repetitions which help anchor the poem. We get the sense that the anchoring of the imagination is being enacted by the poem itself by these repetitions, by a sudden gift of imagination's holy power. Whoops. What else? And notice he begins with an eye downcast, but something happens. He raised up his heavy eyes and instantly beheld. Saw, here another kind of repetition, beheld, saw the length of street, and white, with winter's purest white. There's a simplicity there in that repetition, and of course passion as well. Repetition, as Wordsworth writes in his commentaries on some of the poems, is a form of, it's a way of moving the affections, the feelings. As fair, as fresh, and spotless, save here and there a shadowy passenger, slow, shadowy. Here again another repetition. He usually doesn't repeat as often as this. And then in awful sequestration, he often ends with a heavy Latinate word to get a sense of grandeur after simplicity. Latinate, heavy, polysyllabic. Here we have sequestration. When something is sequestered, it's hidden away. And so you've got this grandeur here with the word. Instead of saying hidden, which would have been homely, he says sequestration. There's something magisterial about St. Paul's grandeur in the snow. Through a veil, through its own sacred veil. Here again the repetition of falling snow. And that's it. That's the visionary moment. And if you're in the 19th century, you might think, well, this is making a mountain out of a molehill. This is reading too much spiritual power into a common occurrence. But that's the point. Wordsworth is trying to say that a cultivated imagination, one habitually sensitive and receptive to beauty, will raise above in these moments, raise our hearts, our affections. And he says it didn't take the trouble away, but it made it bearable. His trouble was not entirely hushed, that might not be. But yet he was given a gift. It's just so Wordsworthian, and you see this movement. It's really a conversion poem in a way, because it begins in one state of mind, something spiritual happens, there's a transformation upon the outside world, there's an internal transformation, and the poem ends with that grand, majestic scene towards the end. So, a great poem. Most people don't know about it. There are so many Wordsworth poems to keep track of that it's kind of hard to know, but sometimes you often will come across a gem like this, as many of his poems are. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay vigilant for encounters like this.